The cafe was buzzing with noise, forks clinking against plates, espresso machines hissing, laughter cutting through the air. But when Natalie Hawthorne walked in, it felt like the world narrowed to just her. She moved like someone who believed the room belonged to her. And maybe in her mind it did. She slid into the booth across from me with a confident toss of her chestnut curls and rested her manicured hand squarely on the table, so the light would catch it just right. There it was. My grandmother's ring. The one she'd promised me since I was a teenager. The one I'd admired on her hand every Sunday afternoon while we sat in the garden, sipping tea and listening to her stories. The one she took off only once, just days before she passed. Natalie smiled, lips painted wine red, voice soaked in fake warmth. "Thanks for meeting me, Claire," she said, stirring her latte without looking up. "I wanted you to be the first to know. Daniel and I are getting married." I felt something twist deep in my chest. Daniel, my ex-husband. The man I'd once planned forever with. The same man who walked out of our marriage claiming he needed clarity. The one now holding hands with my sister. I didn't flinch. Not in front of her. I simply curled my fingers around my coffee cup, grounding myself in its warmth. "Congratulations," I said evenly. "I see you're wearing Grandmother Eleanor's ring." She lifted her hand, making sure it caught the light again. "Oh, this. Well, since Daniel helped me contest the will, it's technically mine now. Along with the estate and the trust." She smiled. Delighted. Funny how things work out, isn't it? I looked at her and saw it all. Her pride, her cruelty, her need to twist the knife. Natalie had always taken what she wanted. My dolls when we were little. My prom date when we were teens. My peace of mind every chance she could get. But this was war. She sipped her latte like it was victory itself. "You know what's really funny?" she added, leaning forward with a conspiratorial tone. "How easy it was to convince the lawyers you were unstable. Daniel gave such a compelling testimony about your episodes." She made air quotes and grinned. "Some edited photos. Few tears. The judge practically handed everything over." She meant the panic attacks. The breakdowns. The ones I had after finding out Daniel was cheating. The ones Natalie now made clear had been with her. I said nothing. I just kept breathing. Because what she didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that 2 nights ago, I had finally opened the worn leather journal Grandmother Eleanor gave me just before she died. She had pressed it into my hands with a weak but steady grip and whispered, "Wait until the right moment." And this. Watching my sister gloat about stealing my life with my ex-husband's help. This was the moment. Natalie leaned in, lowering her voice like we were about to share a secret. But there were no secrets between us, only theft dressed in lipstick and pearls. "I brought you here for a reason," she said, reaching into her designer purse and pulling out a thin envelope. "This isn't just about the ring or the house. I wanted to offer you a solution." I didn't take the envelope. I didn't even look at it. I just stared at her, letting the silence stretch. Natalie smiled, as if she'd rehearsed this moment. "If you sign a legal agreement today waiving any future claim to the estate," she said casually, "I'll arrange for you to receive a small monthly stipend. Nothing extravagant, just enough so you won't end up, you know." She flicked her fingers in the air. "On the street." She actually said that. The woman who used my pain as a strategy, who slept with my husband while I tried to salvage a broken marriage, was now offering me charity, wrapped in condescension. "After all," she said, settling back into her seat like a queen handing down a decree, "we are family." I looked at the envelope, then back at her, and I smiled. Not the kind of smile that meant I accepted her offer. The kind that meant I had already started playing a game she didn't know existed. Because last night, when I opened Grandmother Eleanor's journal, I discovered something she never anticipated. A second set of estate records. Handwritten. Tucked between her personal reflections and pressed violets from our garden. Transactions. Hidden trust. Confidential clauses. One line burned into my memory. The real estate assets are to remain under the dual stewardship of both granddaughters. No action may be taken without both signatures. Natalie thought she'd won. But she had no idea she was holding a counterfeit crown. "You're right," I said calmly, reaching into my bag. "We are family. Which is why there's something you need to see." Her brows furrowed as I pulled out the journal and laid it gently on the table between us. Its cover was worn, the leather cracked and soft with age. She stared at it. "What's this?" she asked, voice tight. "Our grandmother's real legacy," I said. "The part she kept hidden from lawyers. The part she didn't trust you to find." Natalie's expression flickered. Her confidence faltered for the first time since she walked in. He tried to laugh. "You're bluffing." I opened the journal. "Then you won't mind looking through these pages," I replied, sliding a small stack of photocopies across the table. Copies of bank transfers, trust clauses, and handwritten notes signed in grandmother's careful script. Natalie reached for the papers with trembling fingers. And I leaned back, watching the cracks form in her carefully painted world. "You're lying," she whispered. "Daniel said everything was already in my name. The lawyers confirmed it." I shook my head. "Daniel doesn't know about this," I said. "And neither do the lawyers. Grandmother didn't trust anyone, not after what you two tried to do." Her lips parted but no sound came out. This wasn't the look of a woman in control. This was fear, real and raw, surfacing beneath the silk blouse and smug posture. Because for the first time, she realized the game had never been hers to begin with. Natalie's hands were still gripping the photocopies when I pulled out my phone. She looked up. "Who are you calling?" I didn't answer. I just tapped the name I had memorized the night before. Mr. Arthur Lynn, Grandmother Eleanor's private trustee. The man she'd referred to in a single line of her journal. If anything goes wrong, Arthur will know what to do. The phone rang once, twice, then picked up. "Mr. Lynn," I said, my voice steady. "It's Claire Abbott, Eleanor's granddaughter." There was a pause on the other end. Then a warm, measured voice responded. "Claire, I've been expecting your call." I looked at Natalie, whose face had lost its color. "I have the journal," I said. And she was right. They took everything they could. But they don't know about the second trust. "Understood," he replied. "Are you ready to proceed?" I paused, then looked my sister square in the eyes. "Yes," I said. "Let's begin." Natalie's voice cracked. "Wait, Claire, come on. Let's talk about this." I ended the call before she could finish, placing the phone slowly back on the table. "You want to talk now?" I said, tilting my head. "What happened to all that confidence 5 minutes ago?" Her lips trembled. She didn't answer. Because she knew, deep down, that she'd gone too far this time. "I gave you years of grace," I continued. "I stayed quiet when you lied. I turned away when you flirted with my husband. I forgave you more times than I can count. But now," I leaned in, my voice as cold as the sapphire necklace she wore, once mine. "Now it's your turn to watch everything you built fall apart." She sat frozen. "Claire," she whispered, desperate. "You don't understand. Daniel and I already spent the money. I finished for her. Bought the new house. Planned the wedding." She didn't respond. She didn't have to. 'Cause I already knew. They weren't just thieves, they were overconfident ones. And the real estate, the trust, the accounts they thought they owned. Shells. All while the real wealth, the assets that mattered, sat under lock and key, protected by the man Natalie didn't even know existed. The morning sun filtered through the curtains of my apartment as I stood at the kitchen counter, sipping my coffee with both hands wrapped around the mug. It had been less than 24 hours since I met Natalie at the cafe. Since I reminded her who she was dealing with. And now the pieces were starting to fall. My phone buzzed. "Mr. Lynn." A simple text. "Quarterly trust statements are being sent today. They'll realize it soon." I stared at the message for a long moment. Then I smiled. Natalie and Daniel had thought they'd won. They had paraded around town, showed off their new house, flaunted their engagement party plans like trophies. But all of it was built on sand. Their inheritance was nothing more than the leftovers grandmother Eleanor let them find. The real fortune, the investment portfolios, the properties, the antique art, was hidden away in a dual consent trust they couldn't touch without my signature, which they were never going to get. Later that afternoon I drove to grandmother's home, my home now, though they didn't know it. The Victorian stood proud and still, the same ivy curling around its windows, the air around it still holding the scent of lavender from the garden she used to tend. Inside I walked through the study, running my fingers across the rows of books I knew by heart. That's when I heard it. The unmistakable screech of tires outside. Then footsteps pounding across the front porch. And then her voice. "Claire. Open the door." "Natalie." I stayed seated in grandmother's chair, calm and quiet, the journal still resting in my lap. She banged again. "Claire, the accounts are empty." "They're empty." Behind her, I heard Daniel's voice rise, frantic. "I told you to check everything. What did you sign? What did we miss?" I walked to the door, not to open it, just to be heard. "Nothing's missing," I called through the wood. "You just never had it to begin with." Silence. Then Natalie again, her voice cracking. "Claire, please. We have bills coming up. We already spent. Money you never had," I interrupted. Funny how fast illusions fall apart. I pressed my hand against the door, listening. "You built your future on my pain. Now you're learning what it's like to stand on nothing." There was a thud, someone slumping against the door. I didn't open it. Instead, I returned to the study, to the very chair grandmother once sat in as she told me stories of loyalty, legacy, and love. And I waited, because the next move was theirs. That evening, as twilight painted the sky in soft hues of lavender and ash, my phone lit up with call after call, each one more desperate than the last. First Natalie, then Daniel, then both over and over again. Missed call. Voicemail. Another missed call. But I ignored every single one. I didn't need to hear the panic in their voices to know what it sounded like. They had gambled with stolen chips and were finally realizing the house had been rigged from the start. But then, just before midnight, a new name flashed across my screen. Margaret Whitmore. Daniel's mother. I hadn't heard her voice since she stood in court and testified that I was emotionally unstable during my divorce. That I had always been a bit unwell. Her words were what tipped the judge's decision, what gave Daniel the leverage to challenge grandmother Eleanor's will in the first place. Curiosity got the better of me. Answered. "Hello." A shaky breath came through the line. "Claire," she said, her voice surprisingly soft. I wasn't sure if you'd answer. I know I might be the last person you want to hear from." "You'd be correct," I replied coldly. "I understand," she said quickly. "But please, I need to know what's going on. Sarah's in hysterics. Daniel won't tell me anything. Just that the money. That it's gone." I let the silence linger. He pressed on. "You must understand. They've already spent so much. The house, the new car, the engagement party next week." I laughed quietly. "You mean the party at the same country club where Daniel and I got married?" He paused. "Yes," she admitted. I stepped toward the window and looked out at the garden grandmother loved so dearly. "You stood in front of a judge and swore I wasn't fit to manage a bank account, Margaret. That I was fragile, unreliable." "That wasn't my decision," she said quickly. "They convinced me, Sarah, Daniel. They said you weren't well. And you believed them," I said flatly. "Because it was easier than believing your son was a liar." She was quiet for a long moment. "I made a mistake," she said finally. "But you have to understand, Claire. This affects all of us. We could lose everything." "I lost everything once already," I said. "When you all conspired to take it." "I didn't conspire. You testified," I snapped. "And now you want me to save them." There was nothing left to say. Hung up. Let her sit with that. Let all of them. The next morning I called Mr. Lin. "They're trying to rally support," I said. "They're going to spin the story again, make me the villain." "I've already prepared a press-proof version of the journal entries," he replied. "And a backup legal motion. We're ready." Smiled. Because this time I wasn't the one under attack. I was holding the matches. The morning air was crisp as I stepped out of my car, heels clicking sharply against the marble steps of First Crest National Bank. I wore grandmother Eleanor's vintage Chanel suit, the navy one with pearl buttons she saved for important days. She always said, "When you walk into a room dressed like you belong, no one questions why you're there." Today I wasn't just walking into the room. I was walking into a reckoning. Inside the bank's glass-walled conference room, they were already seated. Natalie, Daniel, Margaret. Their attorney, a young man with too much gel in his hair and not enough experience in his briefcase, stood when I entered. But they didn't. They couldn't. Because when they saw me walk in, elegant, calm, composed, their faces changed. Daniel's jaw tightened. Natalie's eyes dropped to the table. Margaret looked like she hadn't slept in days. And I was radiant. "Now that everyone is here," the bank manager began, "we need to discuss the irregularities on the accounts used by Mr. Thornton and Ms. Hawthorne." I sat down slowly, placing grandmother's journal on the table like a sacred artifact. Natalie's eyes darted to it. Daniel looked away. Their lawyer cleared his throat. "My clients accessed those funds under the authority granted to them by the court following a valid will contest. There was no wrongdoing." "With all due respect," I interrupted, "that court decision was based on false information. Information we now have evidence was fabricated." I opened the journal and pulled out copies of everything: forged photos, backdated messages, falsified medical summaries. The damning proof of a manipulation campaign years in the making. Mr. Lin took over from there. "Everything you see here," he said to the room, "demonstrates a coordinated effort to deceive the probate court. The testimony submitted painted Claire Abbott as unfit. But we now know those statements were untrue and strategically constructed to steal control of an estate." The bank manager looked uneasy. "So the trust funds they've been accessing," Mr. Lin didn't flinch, "were never theirs to access. The real assets were moved into a protected trust before Ms. Eleanor Abbott passed. A trust requiring Claire's joint signature for disbursements." Daniel's face drained of color. Natalie looked like she might throw up. The lawyer stammered. "They didn't know. They thought they'd erased me," I said, cutting in. "But grandmother knew. She saw this coming. She planned for it." Margaret finally spoke. "So what happens now?" I folded my hands calmly. "Well," I said, "as of this morning, the loans you took out using fake asset values are in default. The bank will begin repossession proceedings within the week." "No," Natalie gasped. "You can't do this." "I'm not doing anything," I said softly. "You did this to yourself." Then I looked her straight in the eyes. "You tried to take my life and wear it like a costume. But you forgot. I built the parts of it that mattered." The room had gone completely still. Natalie's lawyer was whispering furiously to her while Daniel rubbed his forehead like he could erase the entire situation with his palm. Margaret just sat frozen, eyes locked on the table, unable to look at me. I didn't speak again until Mr. Lin placed a document between them. 3 copies. Notarized. Stamp. A formal confession of fraud and intentional misrepresentation in the probate case of Eleanor Abbott's estate. Mr. Lin cleared his throat. "If you both sign this, the trust will be allowed, at Claire's discretion, to release a portion of the funds to help pay off the loans and prevent public litigation." "And if they don't sign?" the bank manager asked. Mr. Lin didn't even blink. "Then we proceed with a fraud case. All evidence, including the forged court documents and altered photos, will become part of the public record. The bank will be forced to liquidate collateral assets. Press inquiries will follow." Daniel stiffened. Natalie looked at me with wide, wounded eyes, like she wanted to cry. But I didn't flinch. This was the same woman who had smiled in court as she accused me of being emotionally unfit. The same woman who slept with my husband, stole my grandmother's ring, and offered me pocket change to disappear. Now she was learning that silence doesn't mean surrender. Her lawyer tried to object, but Margaret leaned in and hissed, "Sign it." Daniel scowled. "You're all monsters." "No," I said quietly. "You just don't like mirrors." Natalie's hand trembled as she picked up the pen. She scribbled her name first. Daniel followed, slower, his jaw tight with humiliation. Mr. Lin gathered the documents, nodding at me with a quiet kind of approval. But I wasn't done yet. My eyes dropped to grandmother's ring, the one glinting mockingly on Natalie's hand. "That," I said softly, pointing to the diamond, "was never yours." Natalie hesitated. "Claire, take it off." Her lips parted like she might argue. But then she saw the look in my eyes. She removed the ring and placed it on the table, her fingers lingering for a second longer than they should have. I reached for it, holding the gold band between my fingers. It was warm. Not from her touch, but from legacy. This wasn't a trinket. It wasn't about money. This ring represented 50 years of loyalty, hardship, and grace. The life grandmother had lived with integrity. The life Natalie tried to steal in one sweep of greed. "I remember the day she gave this to me," I said, sliding it onto my finger. She said, "This isn't about wealth. It's about who you choose to be." And now I finally understood what she meant. I stood, leaving them with nothing but their shame and their signatures. "You tried to destroy me," I said softly. "But all you did was show me how strong I've become." Then I turned and walked out. By the time I reached my car, I'd received 3 new voicemails. 2 were from Daniel, full of empty apologies and desperate attempts to make things right. The 3rd was from Margaret, her voice thick with disappointment and confusion, asking how she could help fix this. I didn't listen to any of them. I had spent too many years trying to fix the broken pieces of people who shattered me on purpose. This time I let the pieces fall. That evening, I returned to grandmother's home. My home. The warmth of her legacy now wrapped around me like armor. I placed the ring gently on her old lace handkerchief beside her journal, the sun setting behind the stained glass window. It was done. They had signed the confession. And by morning, the news would begin to ripple. The fallout came faster than I expected. By noon the next day, Daniel's business accounts were frozen. The bank had begun repossessing the assets he used as collateral on false valuations. Cars, his office lease, even the engagement party deposit. The man who once walked with pride now had creditors circling like vultures. And Natalie. She vanished from social media. The same woman who once posted daily photos of her perfect new life was now silent, completely invisible. Word spread quickly through our circle of old friends and family. I didn't tell anyone what happened. I didn't have to. The facts spoke louder than gossip. And the confession documents, now notarized and sealed in legal records, ensured that they couldn't flip the narrative. They couldn't play the victim this time. I received an email from a local reporter who had caught wind of the court reversal and financial scandal. She asked if I wanted to share my side. I declined. Not out of fear. Out of peace. I didn't need the spotlight. I already had everything I needed. Then came the final twist. A week later, I received a registered letter from Daniel's lawyer. He was trying to renegotiate the confession agreement. Apparently, the debts were worse than he realized. The bank was moving forward with foreclosure. "Please reconsider," the letter read. "He's willing to return what's left if you'd be open to mediation." I folded the letter neatly and tossed it into the fire. Let them lose it all. Because they were never just after money. They were after my dignity, my peace, my memories. And now, they had neither. The quiet that followed the storm wasn't empty. It was earned. For the first time in years, my life didn't revolve around fighting for space, for justice, or for scraps of validation. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was rebuilding. The trust grandmother Eleanor created was more than a shield. It was a blueprint. Inside her journal were not only financial records, but notes, ideas, even handwritten outlines for a project she never had the chance to begin. A scholarship foundation for young women with no support system. She had called it the Eleanor Project. So I made it real. I used part of the trust to set up a non-profit under her name. Our mission: provide legal, financial, and educational support to women overcoming betrayal, hardship, and financial abuse, just like I had. The first grant I issued went to a young woman named Julia. She'd put herself through school while caring for a disabled sibling, only to be conned by a partner who drained her savings. She cried when I handed her the acceptance letter. "You have no idea what this means," she said. But I did. Absolutely did. I moved into grandmother's home officially that spring. I painted the study walls a soft green, the color she always said reminded her of fresh starts. I kept her books, her chair, even her crossword puzzles. But the silence in the house had changed. It wasn't heavy anymore. It was hopeful. I hosted dinners again. Just small ones. Close friends, trusted colleagues, women I'd met through the foundation. Each night felt like a restoration, of community, of dignity, of joy. One evening, while I was placing fresh flowers in the foyer, my phone buzzed with a message. It was from Natalie. Just a single line. "I hope someday you'll forgive me." I didn't reply. Not out of spite, but because I finally understood something grandmother had been trying to teach me all along. Forgiveness isn't owed to those who aren't ready to change. Some chapters don't need closure. They need distance. And I was done carrying her choices on my back. That night, I sat at grandmother's old desk, wearing the ring she had once promised would guide me when I felt lost. It glinted softly in the lamplight. Not just a family heirloom anymore. A symbol of everything I had survived. And everything I had become. 6 months had passed. The house was blooming again. Not just with roses in the garden or fresh paint on the walls, but with clarity, stability, and peace. And me. I was no longer the woman Natalie once mocked over coffee. I was no longer Daniel's discarded wife. I was Claire Abbott, founder of the Eleanor Project, legal steward of a family legacy, and the woman who walked through fire and came out shining. One quiet morning in autumn, I received a manila envelope. Inside were documents from Mr. Lin. The final dissolution papers. The fraudulent will contest had been officially overturned, the original estate ruling reinstated in my name. There was also a handwritten note. Not from my lawyer. From Margaret. She wrote, "I've watched the fallout with growing shame. I once believed Daniel and Natalie when they said you were unstable. I see now the only unstable thing was their greed. Thank you for showing strength without bitterness. You were always more of a daughter than Natalie ever acted like a sister." I folded the letter and placed it in grandmother's journal. Not for revenge. For the record. Because every story deserves to end on the truth. I never saw Natalie again. From what I've heard, she quietly moved to another city. The engagement was dissolved. Daniel filed for bankruptcy. The house they bought together was repossessed. I didn't rejoice in it. But I didn't feel sorry either. They didn't just try to steal my inheritance. They tried to erase my voice. My history. They tried to define me by the moments when I was at my lowest. But what they never understood was that rock bottom is where women like me find bedrock, the place we build from. These days, I still wear grandmother's ring. Not to show off, but to remember that even when someone tries to rewrite your story, you can take back the pen. You can flip the script. You can win without screaming, without groveling, without giving in. Because the most satisfying revenge is reclaiming the life they thought you'd never recover from.